Alvin York was a Tennessee mountaineer and a remarkable military figure who became one of the most celebrated American heroes of World War I. Alvin York, sergeant and later recipient of the Medal of Honor, was born in a two-room log cabin in Pall Mall, Tennessee on December 13, 1887. He came from humble circumstances. He had a distinctive background as a backwoods farmer and marksman. York's early years were marked by poverty and hardship. He was the third of 11 children born to William Uriah York and Mary Elizabeth Brooks York. His education was limited, amounting to only 9 months of schooling in a one-room schoolhouse. His childhood was spent in the Cumberland Mountains, where his family struggled to make a living from their small farm. Life in the mountains was difficult, but it taught York skills that would later prove invaluable. From an early age, York learned to hunt and shoot. In the mountains of Tennessee, marksmanship was not a sport but a necessity. Families depended on hunting to supplement their meager food supplies. York became an expert shot with a rifle, able to hit targets at remarkable distances. He participated in turkey shoots and other shooting competitions where he developed a reputation as one of the finest marksmen in the region. His weapon of choice was a muzzle-loading rifle, though he was proficient with any firearm. York's young adulthood was troubled. After his father died in 1911, Alvin struggled with the responsibilities of helping to support his large family. He worked various jobs including farming, logging, and construction on the railroad. During this period, he fell into bad habits. He drank heavily, gambled, and was known for his violent temper. He got into frequent fights and earned a reputation as a troublemaker. His mother worried constantly about his behavior and prayed for his redemption. The turning point in York's life came in 1914 when he experienced a religious conversion. After a close friend was killed in a barroom fight, York attended a revival meeting at the Church of Christ in Christian Union. He underwent a dramatic spiritual transformation, giving up drinking, gambling, and fighting. He became deeply religious, attending church regularly and studying the Bible intensively. His faith became the central organizing principle of his life. York's newfound religious convictions created a profound dilemma when the United States entered World War I in April 1917. Congress passed the Selective Service Act, instituting a military draft. York registered for the draft as required by law, but his religious beliefs posed a serious problem. The Church of Christ in Christian Union was a pacifist denomination that opposed all warfare. York believed that the Bible commanded Christians not to kill. When York received his draft notice in 1917, he attempted to claim exemption as a conscientious objector. On his draft registration form, he wrote that he did not want to fight. However, his church was not on the government's list of recognized pacifist denominations. His claim for conscientious objector status was denied. York was drafted into the army and ordered to report for training. He complied with the order, but his conscience troubled him deeply. In November 1917, York arrived at Camp Gordon in Georgia for basic training. He was assigned to Company G, 328th Infantry Regiment, 82nd Division. The 82nd Division was composed largely of draftees from Tennessee, Georgia, and Alabama. York proved to be an excellent soldier in many respects. His marksmanship skills were immediately apparent. He could outshoot nearly every other man in his company. His mountain upbringing had made him physically tough and accustomed to hardship. However, his religious objections to fighting remained. York's company commander, Captain Edward Danforth, and his battalion commander, Major George Buxton, both recognized York's dilemma. Rather than dismissing his concerns, they engaged him in lengthy discussions about faith, duty, and the morality of warfare. They debated biblical passages with York, arguing that there were circumstances under which Christians could justly fight. They discussed the concepts of just war and the defense of innocent people against aggression. These conversations lasted for hours over several days. Major Buxton gave York a leave of absence to return home to Tennessee to think and pray about his decision. York spent 10 days in the mountains, wrestling with his conscience. He read his Bible, prayed, and contemplated whether he could reconcile his faith with military service. He concluded that defending his country and protecting innocent people from German aggression was consistent with Christian principles. When York returned to Camp Gordon, he informed his commanders that he had resolved his doubts and was willing to fight. In May 1918, the 82nd Division sailed for France. York and his fellow soldiers arrived in Europe as the war entered its final critical phase. The division underwent additional training in France before being sent to the front lines. York adapted well to military life. His skills as a marksman and his physical endurance made him a valuable soldier. He was promoted to corporal. The 82nd Division entered combat in June 1918, participating in the St. Mihiel offensive in September. York's unit performed well in this operation, which successfully reduced a German salient. The experience gave the division confidence and combat experience. However, it was the Meuse-Argonne offensive that would make Alvin York famous. The Meuse-Argonne offensive, launched on September 26, 1918, was the largest American operation of the war. Over 1 million American soldiers participated in this massive assault designed to break through German defenses in northeastern France. The offensive was part of a coordinated Allied effort to end the war. The fighting was brutal and casualties were heavy on both sides. York's regiment, the 328th Infantry, was assigned to capture German positions in the Argonne Forest. The forest was a nightmarish battlefield, dense with vegetation and defended by experienced German troops equipped with machine guns and artillery. The terrain favored the defenders. Visibility was limited and advancing troops were vulnerable to ambush. On October 8, 1918, York's battalion was ordered to attack German positions on Hill 223 near the town of Châtelchery. The Germans held the high ground and had established machine gun nests that commanded the approaches. Previous American attacks had been repulsed with heavy losses. York's company was part of the assault force. The attack began early in the morning. Almost immediately, the Americans came under intense machine gun fire. Men fell all around York as German machine guns swept the advancing lines. The attack stalled as soldiers sought cover from the murderous fire. York's platoon, commanded by Sergeant Bernard Early, was ordered to work around the German flank and silence the machine guns. 17 men, including York, now a corporal, moved through the forest attempting to get behind the German positions. The patrol stumbled upon a German command post in a valley. They surprised a group of German soldiers and took them prisoner. However, German machine gunners on the hillside above spotted the Americans and opened fire. The machine gun fire was devastating. 9 of the 17 Americans were killed or wounded in the first burst of fire. Sergeant Early was among the wounded. Command of the patrol devolved to Corporal York. York found himself in a desperate situation. He was in command of 7 unwounded men guarding about 30 German prisoners while multiple machine gun nests fired at them from the hillside. His comrades were pinned down and unable to return fire effectively. York realized that if he did not act immediately, they would all be killed. What happened next became the stuff of legend. York positioned himself where he had a clear field of fire at the German machine gunners. Using the marksmanship skills he had learned hunting turkeys in the Tennessee mountains, York began shooting at the German gunners. He fired his rifle with devastating accuracy. Each shot found its mark. German soldiers fell one after another. York worked methodically, shooting the machine gunners in sequence. When 6 German soldiers charged at him with fixed bayonets, York drew his pistol and shot all 6, starting with the last man in line and working forward so the others would not see their comrades falling and take cover. It was a technique he had learned shooting turkeys, where you shoot the rear bird first so the others do not scatter. The German fire began to slacken as York continued shooting. He had killed more than 20 German soldiers. The German commander, Lieutenant Paul Vollmer, realized the hopelessness of his situation. He offered to surrender his men if York would stop shooting. York agreed. Vollmer blew a whistle and German soldiers began emerging from their positions with their hands up. York and his 7 men, along with their original prisoners, now had more than 90 German prisoners. York organized the prisoners into a column and began marching them back toward American lines. Along the way, they encountered more German positions. York, using the German officer as a shield and intermediary, convinced these positions to surrender as well. By the time York reached American lines, he had 132 German prisoners. The march back was harrowing. York had to navigate through the battlefield while keeping control of more than 100 prisoners with only a handful of men. When York's battalion commander saw him approaching with a massive column of prisoners, he reportedly asked, "Well, York, I hear you have captured the whole German army." York replied, "No, sir. I only have 132. York's actions on October 8, 1918, had single-handedly eliminated a German strongpoint that had been holding up the American advance. His patrol had silenced 35 machine guns and killed at least 28 German soldiers. The exact number of Germans York personally killed has been debated by historians, but it was at least 20. Some estimates place it as high as 28. The impact of York's actions was immediate and significant. The elimination of the German machine gun nests allowed the American advance to continue. York's feat quickly became known throughout the division and then the entire American Expeditionary Force. General John Pershing, commander of American forces in France, called York's action the greatest individual accomplishment by any soldier in the war. York was promoted to sergeant and recommended for the Medal of Honor. He also received the Distinguished Service Cross and numerous French and Italian decorations. The French awarded him the Croix de Guerre and the Legion of Honor. The Italians gave him the Croce di Guerra. York became the most decorated American soldier of World War I. After the armistice on November 11, 1918, York remained in France with occupation forces until April 1919. During this time, news of his exploits spread throughout America. Newspapers published accounts of his heroism. He became a national celebrity before he even returned home. When York's ship docked in New York in May 1919, he was greeted as a hero. The city gave him a ticker-tape parade. He was feted at banquets and receptions. Offers poured in from businesses, publishers, and movie studios. York could have become wealthy from his fame. Promoters offered him substantial sums to appear in advertisements, lecture tours, and films. However, York refused most of these offers. He did not want to profit from his military service. He believed that accepting money for what he had done would be dishonorable. He turned down offers worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. York wanted only to return to Tennessee and resume his quiet life. York did accept some opportunities that he felt were appropriate. He worked briefly with the War Department to promote the sale of victory bonds. He also agreed to write his autobiography, which was serialized in the Saturday Evening Post. The money from the autobiography allowed York to marry his longtime sweetheart, Gracie Williams, and purchase a farm in Tennessee. York and Gracie were married on June 7, 1919. They would have 8 children together. York settled into farming in Pall Mall, Tennessee. He built a house and worked his land. He remained active in his church and became a respected member of his community. However, York did not forget the lack of educational opportunities that had limited him and other mountain children. He became passionate about improving education in his region. In 1926, York founded the Alvin York Agricultural Institute, a school for mountain children in Jamestown, Tennessee. The school provided education and vocational training to students from poor families. York raised money for the school and served on its board. The institute became his primary focus and legacy. He traveled throughout Tennessee and beyond, giving speeches and raising funds for the school. The school still operates today as the Alvin York Institute. York lived quietly in Tennessee throughout the 1920s and 1930s. He farmed, raised his family, and worked on behalf of his school. He avoided publicity and rarely spoke about his war experiences. He had done his duty and wanted to move on with his life. However, as World War II approached, York's story gained renewed relevance. In 1940, a Hollywood studio approached York about making a film about his life. York had consistently refused such offers for 20 years, but now he reconsidered. He was concerned about the rise of fascism in Europe and believed that his story might help inspire Americans to defend democracy. He agreed to the film on the condition that Gary Cooper play him and that any profits he received would go to his school. The film, Sergeant York, was released in 1941 and became a massive success. It was the highest-grossing film of 1941 and won Gary Cooper the Academy Award for Best Actor. The film introduced York's story to a new generation of Americans. It premiered just months before the attack on Pearl Harbor, and its themes of duty and courage resonated with a nation about to enter another world war. York was too old to serve in World War II, but he contributed to the war effort in other ways. He toured the country promoting war bonds and supporting the troops. His son, Alvin Jr., served in the military during the war. York's fame from the film made him a symbol of American courage and values during the war years. After World War II, York returned to his quiet life in Tennessee. He continued working on behalf of his school and remained active in his community. However, his later years were marked by financial difficulties. The Internal Revenue Service claimed that York owed back taxes on income from the film and his autobiography. York disputed the claim, arguing that he had donated the money to charity. The dispute dragged on for years and caused York considerable stress. York's health began to decline in the 1950s. He suffered a stroke in 1954 that left him partially paralyzed. He had additional strokes in subsequent years that further debilitated him. He was confined to bed for much of his final decade. Despite his illness, York remained mentally alert and continued to receive visitors who wanted to meet the famous war hero. The state of Tennessee and the federal government eventually intervened to help York with his tax problems. The IRS agreed to a settlement, and Tennessee citizens raised money to pay off York's debts. Congress passed special legislation to help him. In his final years, York was cared for by his wife Gracie and his children. On September 2, 1964, Alvin York died at the Veterans Administration Hospital in Nashville, Tennessee. He was 76 years old. He had suffered a cerebral hemorrhage. York's funeral was held in Pall Mall, and he was buried in the cemetery at Wolf River. His funeral was attended by thousands, including military officials, politicians, and common citizens who wanted to pay their respects to a genuine American hero. In death, as in life, York was remembered as a man of simple faith, courage, and integrity. His legacy is that of a reluctant warrior who overcame his doubts to serve his country with extraordinary valor. York's story resonates because it embodies fundamental American values, the common man rising to meet extraordinary challenges, faith and conscience wrestling with duty, and the rejection of fame and fortune in favor of simple virtue. Modern historians continue to study York's actions on October 8, 1918. Some have questioned whether the accounts of his feat were exaggerated. However, extensive research, including German records and testimony from witnesses on both sides, has confirmed the essential accuracy of the story. York did accomplish what was attributed to him. He was a genuine hero whose actions met the highest standards of military valor. Perhaps what makes York's story most compelling is not just what he did in combat, but who he was as a person. He was a man who struggled with profound moral questions about violence and faith. He resolved those questions through prayer and reflection, not by ignoring them. Once committed to his duty, he performed it with extraordinary skill and courage. After the war, he refused to exploit his fame for personal gain and instead dedicated himself to helping others through education. York represents the best of American military tradition, the citizen soldier who serves not for glory or gain but from duty, who fights not because he loves war but because he loves what war defends. His reluctance to fight made his heroism more meaningful, not less. His humility in victory made him more admirable than any amount of boasting could have. In the end, Alvin York was neither a professional soldier nor a natural warrior, but rather a Tennessee farmer who found himself in extraordinary circumstances and rose to meet them. His legacy includes not just his actions in the Argonne Forest but also his school in Tennessee and his example of how fame and honor should be borne with humility and grace. He is remembered today as one of America's greatest military heroes, a man whose courage in battle was matched by his integrity in peace.